Hey everyone, so we've come to the end of 205 with some selections from Paradise Lost, and I just want to give you a few notes for things that you need to keep in mind as you are reading Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is an epic poem in 12 books, modeled after the Virgilian model for the Aeneid, right? And this is something that Milton had envisioned in a sense since his days at Cambridge as a young man, right? Milton had always had an idea in his head that he would sort of create something of a literary significance, of a religious significance, of a political significance, and of a national significance ever since he was about 23 years old, right? When he writes a poem meditating on how he has not accomplished anything at the age of 23, right? And as a young man, he writes a poem about the gunpowder plot, basically a dramatization of the conspiracy to blow up Parliament and kill James by the recusant Catholics who felt persecuted by the Protestant majority. And so you see his whole poetic project, and in some ways his political career, but his poetic career is building up to this, right? Um, it was first envisioned as a tragedy, as a drama, and you will see, I think, in the way that some of the scenes are set up, that you do see a lot of drama to what's going on, right? You do see some things that you may see in a morality play, right? You do see Satan as taking on a dramatic character, right? As a sort of like a very powerful individualist type personality, um, someone who tempts others and someone who is self tempted, right? And I think the central thing that you have to keep in mind is something that I spoke about when you were reading Areopagitica for the first part of this learning module, which is the importance of free will, right? God in book 3 decides that he cannot control directly what happens. He cannot direct human behavior. If he were to direct human behavior, there is no way to tell if humans are behaving in a virtuous way, if humans are in fact good, right? Good and evil have a very interesting relationship, and it's almost as if the existence of one depends on the existence of the other, right? If there is no challenge, if there is no trial, right? If there is no way to prove yourself good, how can you be said to be good? And this has been something that Milton has been toying with, his whole career. And now, another thing that he's been, and you see this with the way that the temptation of Eve plays out, right? The temptation of Adam as well, but specifically with Eve, right? Um, the way that she is allowed to go off by herself because to restrain her would deprive her of some sort of a moral virtuous agency, right? Another thing to keep in mind is Milton, what he says that he sets out to do. The whole point of his long epic poem is to justify the ways of God to man, right? And this is Milton's project. And Milton has an interesting way of distancing himself from his text by attributing what he is writing to the presence of a muse, right? Something that you see in the epic tradition, in something like Homer, I sing of the wrath of Achilles in the Iliad, right? And in the Odyssey and in the Aeneid, right? Like you do see the authors attempt to sort of distance themselves from their subject matter by attributing their revelations to the presence of a muse who is speaking through them, right? So Milton postures himself as if he is serving as the vessel of God, right? And there are a lot of ways in which the text is sort of reflecting itself, right? There are episodes that reflect other episodes, right? Satan's decision in the Parliament of Hell to invade um, Eden, so there's like themes of conquest involved, mirrors the Son's decision in Book 3 to save mankind, to rescue God's creation from evil, from corruption, right? And it's not going to be him fighting with Satan in any sort of like a militaristic way. It's going to be him sacrificing himself and dying, becoming man, and dying for the sins of human beings and allowing them, making the possibility for salvation at the end of the world, right? And Milton's Milton's humanism comes through. Milton's religious beliefs come through. His politics come through. God is described as a monarch. Satan is described as a revolutionary, but he is also described as a monarch. Um, Violence is depicted in a fashion that is very ambivalent, right? You see sort of the violence that goes on in book 5. So there's a depiction of the war in heaven, which Raphael gives to Adam when he comes to warn him about what is going to happen, that he is going to be tempted, right? Um, that is sort of the angel's way of telling Adam what happened, right? Using very militaristic metaphors and militaristic terms, right? But the true battle between good and evil does not play out on a battlefield, right? It plays out in much more abstract terms, in terms of virtue, in terms of sacrifice, right? This is an unheroic epic, and what I mean by an unheroic epic, it is not based on battles, on a battlefield with swords and bloodshed, right? This is based on this is leading up to Christ's sacrifice of himself for the good of mankind, right? For the sins of mankind, in order to allow man to achieve salvation, right? So Milton is sort of, I think that this text is a retrospective on what had happened, right? On the idea that the Republicans and the people who had gone against the king had welcomed the king back because they thought that the king would restore peace and prosperity and trade and financial success and all these things, right? That they had prostituted, what he says, prostituted their religion and liberty for the sake of trade, right? Liberty is a big thing for Milton, and liberty is only possible in a commonwealth, right? And not in the monarchy, not in an absolute monarchy. And so, there are a lot of things that we have to question, like, is Eve's pursuit of knowledge or her pursuit of greater understanding, are these things bad things? Is Milton questioning? Is he calling into question the pursuit of knowledge? Is he reminding us that, in a world in which there is an all-powerful God, is it possible for human beings, like in the Marlovian tradition, is it possible for human beings to sort of reach beyond their means, right? That's something that you need to sort of keep in mind. And poetically, a lot of the same things sort of apply, right? You'll notice that, like, when you read book 2, the description of sin is very similar to the description of Duessa, and it reminds you of the description of error in book 1 of the Fairy Queen, right? So Milton is working within the English tradition in that score, but Milton is also blazing a very new trail in the way that he is depicting what is truly heroic sort of behavior, right? And he is, talking about humanistic values of knowledge and things like that, but he's also questioning, like, how far should we be searching, right? And the fact that Milton depicts his God as a king is a very interesting thing, because Milton was a regicide, right? The fact that Milton was a champion of liberty and was a champion of free will, but in book 12 he sort of comes to the conclusion through Michael that true liberty has been lost because of the fall, right? So this is a very ambivalent text, and I think part of its ambivalence is the fact that the revolution had failed, right? The possibilities for religion, the possibilities for politics, all these things that have become possibilities for true change in the country, right? All these things had failed. Milton his religion is sort of a sect of one. He did not believe in an all sort of like a powerful centralized church, right? He believed in the individual's relationship to God, right? But all these things were sort of nixed by conservative parliamentarians, reactionary parliamentarians, and eventually by the restoration of the monarchy, right? So Milton's is a very ambivalent text. And another theme is blindness, right? Milton had gone blind in the 1650s when he was working for Cromwell around that time. And this ability, this attempt to sort of see things that are unseen that Milton is going through is very much informed by his own blindness, right? I don't want you to necessarily do an autobiographical reading when you read this text, but these things are certainly there, right? You know, and there's a lot of contrast, good and evil, darkness and light, right? And all these things, ignorance and knowledge, right? The tree of knowledge is the thing that brings woe into the world. There are a lot of paradoxes here that you need to sort of keep in mind. And I mean, this is sort of in many ways what the humanistic experiment, right? The emphasis on the individual and what the individual is capable of, and the emphasis on classical education and Protestant religious values. This is the capstone of all these things. Everything that the Renaissance in England had been building to is sort of summed up in spectacular fashion with Milton's Paradise Lost. Um, so these are some of the things that you need to keep in mind as you're reading. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, and thank you for being such good sports this whole way. And good luck. Let me know if you have any questions.